On this edition of Native Report, we visit Mazopiya, a natural food market owned and operated by the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community. We attend a reading and book signing by author and columnist Jim Northrup. And we meet Anton Treuer and learn about Hole in the Day, a legendary Ojibwe chief. We also learn something new about Indian country and hear from our elders on this Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Blandin Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Stacy Thunder. Mazopiya, a Dakota word meaning a place where things are kept, is the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community's newest enterprise, a natural food market with a focus on local, clean, and organic foods, fitting in with their overall philosophy of caring for the earth for future generations.
Mazopiya came about, it's really an extension, a continuation of all of the projects that the Shakopee Sioux community is involved in to care for not only our members, but the environment around us. All of our products are either organic, naturally grown, they come from local sources, and we focus on sustainability. In the Dakota language, Mazopiya means a place where things are stored.
The idea behind the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community's newest enterprise sprouted in this community garden plot about a mile northwest of the grocery store.
In 2010, the Shakopee Sioux Community started its first community organic garden. We grew about 1.5 acres of organic produce, and we brought that to our community through a little farmers market, weekly farmers market in the community. While we were doing that, discussion came about to have a grocery store in the community. So I've been very interested in efforts to bring good food, clean food to this community, and so I proposed to our business council that if they wanted to develop a grocery store, would they consider a natural food store? I think at that time I was calling it a health food store, but the point was to get clean food to the community. When we talked about that, they were very interested, and as soon as the decision was made to pursue this endeavor, it really was embraced by the community. When you walk into the front doors of Mazopiya, you are greeted by a wide variety of very colorful produce. So that's our first section, is the produce section. Most all of the produce in Mazopiya is organic produce. Once in a while we'll carry conventional items that are not in season here. And because there's a demand for those things, then we bring those into the store.
The overall health and wellness of Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community members factored into the decision to open Mazopiya.
I think it's important that people have the opportunity to have clean food as a way of maintaining good health, as a way of obtaining good health, as a way of preventing some illnesses. When I started learning about natural foods, I realized pretty quickly that a lot of the issues that Indian people deal with in terms of our health, not only acute conditions, but chronic conditions, very much related to the food that we eat. In fact, in my mind, it's absolutely related, 100%. I'm interested in getting clean food to people as a way of addressing chronic health issues. I think if people eat well, that some of these things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are going to start to take care of themselves and health issues be resolved.
One service you may not find anywhere but at Mazopiya also addresses health issues.
We also will have cooking classes related to some specific issues that people in our community deal with. For example, we'll have classes to talk about gluten-free cooking, how to cook when you are trying to manage diabetes, and how to cook healthy for children. We are very soon going to have a lunchbox makeover session and snacks for kids. Another very important service at Mazovia is a food donation program. Of course, in a grocery store, you always have items that you need to move out. Either they are coming close to their expiration date, or maybe in our produce area, we might get some produce that doesn't look like a perfect orange or an apple that the customers might not be interested in buying. We take those things and we distribute them to Native families in Scott County. We work with our family service department here at the community to distribute those items, and it's been a very successful program, one that we're very proud of.
Much like a larger grocery chain, Mazopiya does have household or bath items. The difference is, here it is all organic, natural, and clean.
I've been using the terms clean food more often than organic or natural. And when I say clean food, I'm encompassing that same kind of concept. By clean, I'm talking about food and food products that are grown and come to us with the least amount of additives, processing, things that are grown without synthetic chemicals. And what I think about, I can relate clean food to our ancestral diet. If you think about what our Native ancestors ate, everything that they ate was organic or natural. We carry wild rice from the Red Lake Reservation. I think we also have wild rice from Boys Fort. We have honey and maple syrup from our community, the Shakopee Sioux Community. We have food products from the Lower Brule Reservation. We'd been open for several weeks, and it was late in the afternoon, and I started walking into the store, and you can see that we have lots of windows in the front, and I really like that because you can see the product, you can see what's happening. And on this particular late afternoon, the lights were coming out through the windows, and it felt really nice. So I walked into the store, and I grabbed my cart, and I started walking around. I said hi to this person, and I said hi to that person. And pretty soon I realized that there were about 6 or 7 of us in the store shopping, and we were all community members. And I could hear people talking in the other aisles, talking about their children, talking about the weather, and talking about the food. And it was such a warm and wonderful experience, just the kind of thing that I'd hoped would happen here.
Did you know there is a national movement on reservations toward using more natural foods? In her book, Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens, Professor Devin Maha Sawa notes that Indian people can control what they eat and take responsibility for their health. Dr. Maha Sawa is a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and professor at the Center for Indigenous Studies at the University of Kansas. While her book includes sections on exercise and other health tips, her book is primarily a collection of recipes from Native people in the United States and Canada. Recovering Our Ancestors' Gardens, Indigenous Recipes and Guide to Diet and Fitness has won awards from the Gourmand World Cookbooks and other awards. The author notes that natives once gathered, hunted, and cultivated foods that made them strong, and that returning to these ways is empowering.
For nearly 22 years, Jim Northrup has authored Fond du Lac Follies, a syndicated newspaper column that is filled with entertaining anecdotes and Indian humor, yet can be serious, often in the same column, with commentary about the world around him. His latest book, Anishinaabe Syndicated, A View from the Res, is a collection of his columns from 1989 to 2001.
Bujuni jibi madazig. Hello, my fellow human beings. Anin ni Anishinaabe dug. Hello, my fellow Indians. Bungi etagoni ni ta Ojibwem. Idash ningaga gwejatun chi Ojibwe moyan. I only know a little bit of Ojibwe, but I'll try speaking Ojibwe. Jim Northrup niin Indigenous Kaz Aganashi Mung. Chibanesi Indigo Ojibwe Mung. Makwanin Nindu Dem. My clan is Bear. Nagachiwanang Niin Indun Jaba. From the Fond du Lac Reservation. Kwapai Iganing and Da. Ingi Ojibian Ijwe Bakishkoni Ganing Minawadash Anishinaabe Akig. I write how it is on the reservation and in Indian country.
On this winter evening, noted author Jim Northrup, his wife Pat, and their guests celebrate the release of his third book, Anishinaabe Syndicated, A View from the Res.
My grandfather, Joseph Northrup, used to write under the pen name of Nodin back in the 1920s and 1930s. So it is this as if he broke the trail for me. And I spent a lot of time away from home when I was a kid, and I wrote a lot of letters home in our boarding school, reform school, Marine Corps. Wherever I went, I always wrote long letters, detailed letters to my folks, let them know what I was doing. So then I was a police officer and had to write reports all the time, so it was just a natural. I was the editor for a while for the reservation newspaper, and I felt constrained. I know if I wrote something critical of the tribal council, I wouldn't have a job the following week. You know, the golden rule, those with the gold make the rules. So I felt constrained, and so I tried another organization to write for them, and it was a little bit different, but once again, the golden rule was in effect. I was talking with Rod Greengrass one day, and he was the editor of The Circle at the time. I had sent a couple stories before to him, and he printed them, and he says, well, why don't you just write a monthly column for us? And I said, okay, I'll try it for a while. And that was 21 and a half years ago. In fact, I just missed my last deadline a couple days ago.
In his Books a Monthly syndicated column, Northrop writes about the world around him.
Well, I think it's important for people to know what we're thinking about and also respond to a crisis like the treaty rights sale. I think it's important for them to know what makes us laugh. Then it's easier to understand us if you know what makes us laugh. And I spend a lot of time laughing at white Americans, some of the absurdities. You know, when you look at a book, you see a sea of gray, it's called. And I thought by slipping in a question, I could break up that sea of gray. And the questions come from, well, most of them come from real life. People have actually asked me these questions. And depending on the style of question they ask, I answer them in the same vein. If they're silly, I get silly right with them. If they really want to know something, I answer that way. Why do you call it a res instead of a reservation? Because the white man owns most of it. The Fond du Lac Reservation, according to the Treaty of 1854, is supposed to contain 100,000 acres. But because of the Dawes Allotment Act and various other homesteading acts, after the allotment period, after every Indian was given 80 acres, the rest was declared surplus and thrown open to homesteaders or corporations or anyone who had the money to buy land. And so now, today, I think we own or control about 25,000 of the original 100,000 acres. I learned this from Simon Ortiz. We were talking about writing one time, and he thought the most important rule would be believe what you have to say is important. Because once you have that, all the rest of it will fall into place. The grammar, the spelling, you know, the construction of what you're doing.
With a monthly column, 3 plays, and 3 books to his credit, there comes a certain amount of celebrity. Yet Northrop doesn't see it that way.
I don't think I'm famous. I don't like it. Famous sounds a tad arrogant. I'll admit to well-known or something of that nature, but famous, no. Because there's always somebody out in Sawyer that knew me when I was dragging my diaper in the sand or when I was drunk crawling down the road. So I have no time for, you know, self-important thoughts. My wife is always there to tighten up my headband or my hat if I get too swell-headed. So I think I pretty well have it under control. I once asked Jimmy Jackson about my writing career, you know, how I would do at it. Jimmy Jackson was our old-time medicine man around here. And he said, yeah, you'll do pretty good at it. I said, well, that's good to hear. He said, but you'll never be rich. And I said, heck. Well, I didn't say heck. I said, And he said, no, what happens is whatever you make, you'll give away. You'll share with the people. And I said, well, that's all right then.
Boarding school education was designed to assimilate American Indians into larger American society, to break up the culture and the people and the strength of the people, really through the most vulnerable of all, the children. And so, yeah, it affected the children, and it affected generations of children, you know, children who didn't get to parent their own children. In my family, several generations of people were removed from their homes and sent to school. And one thing that I think that there has not been enough research done on is effects of the people left behind, the families left behind with children. There were communities and reservations that were essentially childless. I mean, all the lifeblood of what's going to be happening in your future generations is just missing. It's absent. The big plan was that the children were not supposed to ever going to, you know, go back. They were supposed to go into something else when they finished school and never go home. But you know how Indians are. Everybody wants to go home. Everybody wants to be with their family.
Anton Troyer is a professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University and author of several nonfiction books. His most recent work is titled The Assassination of Hole in the Day, a topic that stoked his interest because the assassination was a murder mystery.
Legendary Ojibwe leader Hole in the Day was not a hereditary chief, which may have been a contributing factor for his assassination by other Ojibwe men in 1868.
There were lots of people who hated Hole in the Day, and lots of people who loved him as well. He had many enemies, some other Ojibwe chiefs, other Ojibwe people. If you can imagine, he participated in the treaties by which Ojibwe people lost most of the land in Minnesota. Some people were upset with that. He ostracized and alienated other leaders, made claims far too bold for any sensible person to make, such as I'm Grand Chief of all the Chippewa Indians, and if I say sell, they'll sell, and if I say don't, they won't. And he would act this way and offend a lot of other Ojibwe leaders.
Chief Hole in the Day, or Buganagijig of the Bear Clan, had assumed a position of power during a time of dynamic change across Indian country.
If you can imagine, Fort Snelling is constructed starting in 1819, but by 1848 Minnesota's a state, or is a territory, and 58 they're a state. So within one person's lifetime, Ojibwe people go from masters of all of their territory to holding on to a small portion of what it was, and the area being flooded with white settlement. And throughout all of that, most Native leaders were systematically disempowered.
Referred to as Hole in the Day the Younger, he was known for his assertiveness.
He was especially bright, very, very smart, and he seemed to know when to push and just how far he could push without causing an actual war. And he used that, much like a chess match with the United States government, and was able to get a lot of concessions. In 1862, there was a major conflict between the Dakota Indians and the United States government, and estimates vary from 500 to 1,500 non-native people killed. It was a brutal event. The U.S. government had withheld food rations and annuities, which led to the tensions that broke out in this conflict. Holland the Day, the younger, was well aware of what was going on in Dakota country. There were all kinds of rumors that he was in collusion with them, but I think largely he was acting on his own to exploit that situation for the best benefit of his people.
To do so meant they would sell their land, which meant fewer resources, placing the people in a vicious and unsustainable cycle.
He kind of was well aware that major, outright, sustained conflict with the United States was pretty futile. At the same time, he also knew that if people did not resist in some form or another, that they would simply be pushed aside until there was no land left and they were completely removed from Minnesota. Hole in the Day came to Fort Ripley in his mind for diplomatic negotiations, and he had a number of issues he wanted addressed. And Commissioner Dole and Ashley Morrill wanted to arrest him. They had about 100 Ojibwe warriors there, and there were about 100 U.S. soldiers there facing off. And the commissioner said, well, you're going to be arrested. You're outrageous. You're not representing your people, so forth. And Hole in the Day just stood up and started to lecture the Commissioner of Indian Affairs and said, look at me, there are gray hairs on my head. You have not been a man of your word. You're supposed to pay us X, Y, Z for various treaties. You've not been honoring your terms. And there's no way that you're going to be arresting me. And then he motioned, and another 100 Ojibwe warriors came out from behind the U.S. contingent, surrounding them and outnumbering them 2 to 1. And he said, I will dictate terms for a new treaty.
His signing of the Treaty of 1867, outlining for the removal of the Ojibwe to White Earth, may also be a contributing factor to his untimely death.
He and one other Ojibwe leader from central Minnesota go there and sign this treaty that calls for all of the Ojibwe people to move to White Earth. So 2 chiefs from one band are speaking on behalf of all the bands. He came back to his people and he said, we've signed a treaty and the terms are hard. They want us all to move to White Earth, so don't move. Don't honor the terms of the treaty. We're going to wait until they build a brand new house for every single one of you, a sawmill, a grist mill, and we will not move until that happens. But there were fractures among his people. There was a chief named White Cloud who said, you know what? I'm sick of the drinking going on at Crow Wing. I'm sick of the gambling going on there. I'm sick of you being self-serving. I'm going to White Earth. And so there were breaks in the leadership, and some people were willing to go just to get away from a really rough scene over there. At the same time, most people were listening to the chief.
He was traveling back to Washington to renegotiate the terms of the treaty, and while on the trail between Gull and Crow Wing rivers, he was assassinated.
The assassins themselves were Ojibwe people from Leech Lake. And initially the thought was, okay, these are, it's an Indian feud. They're upset about what happened in 1862, and they're just having some red man's revenge. But it seems a lot more complicated than that. There was an official investigation, and the Job report, which covered the initial findings of the investigation, said some pretty hard things and said, ultimately, when I write down where the blame must be placed, it will be laying at the hands of someone other than a Chippewa. You could look at his personal treaty provisions for payment to him and his heirs and his private land grants and say he was a horrible leader. He was completely self-serving. But you can look at his firm stance, in events in 1862 or with White Earth removal, and see that if they had actually listened to him, they probably would have gotten a house for every family that moved to White Earth and their sawmill and their grist mill, and they would have had a means to live when they got there. And it's when they didn't listen to him and when he was killed that the people were really economically and politically eviscerated. And so he was a strong leader and a capable leader, and I think he deserves a big place in Minnesota history.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org. Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors in Indian Country. I'm Stacy Thunder. See you next time on Native Report.
Stacy Thunder is a member of and legal counsel for the Red Lake Nation, and Tad Johnson is a member of the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa and is chair for the American Indian Studies Department on the campus of the University of Minnesota Duluth. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Blandin Foundation.